Hi everyone. So welcome to episode 2 of A Shameless Period. Yay! Okay, so today's episode, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be addressing puberty, the physical changes around puberty, the psychological, emotional, hormonal, all those changes that take place during, that really transformational time for us. And, that's one thing that nobody can escape on some level. So I think it's really important. And also, it's just to gain a better understanding of, just puberty and how, because for a lot of us, the time of puberty would have been quite challenging. It would have been really stormy. Lots of a, a complete change in perspective and just acclimatizing yourself to the concept of change. So welcome to today's episode. So just a short recap of what we did last episode. So we kick-started the Shameless channel by just talking about periods, the role of shame in menstrual health and reproductive health, and the real importance of incorporating and talking to women about the need for a sexual identity along with a reproductive and a menstrual aspect of identity. And that, those are things, very integral things that um, you just cannot separate. So, and how just trying to sidestep these conversations can actually have quite life changing repercussions on the way we view ourselves, the way we view the people around us, and generally the kind of permission we give ourselves to exist, especially women. And uh, for the men watching this, and I hope there are a lot of men who get to see this, the reason I'm covering things step by step is I'm laying the groundwork and, just the basic information, allowing us to reconnect with existing information, filling in those gaps that, we never had the opportunity to have somebody tell us and guide us accordingly, and without that concept of shame and secrecy and you know generally the hidden and mysterious aspects of menstrual health. And I think for men that it would be really nice to have them participate as much as have the women participate. The women, if you can bring in your personal experience, it is so invaluable to these sessions, because one is we create a more diverse narrative and inclusive narrative. And at one point of time, if you found that you did not have an example for your story, then you sharing your example would allow other people to know that if they are experiencing something similar, then they were not weird, and that feeling of isolation kind of gets dissipated. For men, the understanding of these basics, understanding of these things are so crucial, because one is it is in women all around you that are going through these uh, phenomena. And you've probably seen your mother, your grandmother, your sister, your wife, your girlfriend, um, just basically anyone who is not you possibly has an experience with this. And if we want to live in a place that's more accepting, then I think it's really important that we get an understanding of the basics first. So today we're going to start off with talking about puberty. and what puberty is. So, in the last session, what I spoke about was I gave a brief overview of what puberty was. And the way I described it was puberty is this phase, it's the exiting of a person from childhood latency and is entering a stage of transition which is going to prepare them for adulthood, right? So it is this phase of introduction, initiation, and regulation. So what I mean by that is there are a lot of things, just a lot of engines starting in the body. And this is for both males and females, of course. And there are a lot of engines starting. You start having new mechanisms starting to take place in the brain, and that sends messages to the rest of the body saying, okay, the light bulb is on, and we're going to have to start these dormant factories that were already there in the body, which is basically what puberty is. And so, which is where we start off, is in the person who actually first started looking at puberty and documenting puberty, at least in the way we look at puberty today, is this endocrinologist, Dr. James Tanner, who was in the US. And he started studying these children um, in an orphanage, actually. And he initially started studying these children in an orphanage to see the effects of malnutrition, and how that affects the development in children. But what he also started noticing is, unfortunately, when it comes to adoption, and the older kids, they tend to also mostly remain. And so in that way, it's sort of unfortunate for the children, but also what came out of that is that Dr. Tanner was a person who started documenting the sexual development he noticed in these children, and both in girls and boys. And that's when he started see and that gave him an opportunity to take his research from the orphanage out into the world and see whether that was what was happening and occurring in all the children, and whether they were following similar patterns. So yeah, so we started having the Tanner scales, and this is what we generally refer to even now, um, is the thing we call Tanner scales. And that was established in 1948, where Dr. Tanner started this study of his, and it started developing from then on. So we're going to see what these Tanner scales are now, right? And I'm going to refer to my notes a bit because there's quite a bit of information there. So I hope you don't mind. Yeah, so the first thing that we notice about puberty is that we actually don't really notice when it starts, um, because it starts in the brain, right? So now, or in women or in girls, it starts off around the age of 8. But what Dr. Tanner did, and very cleverly, of course, is that he gave these phases a range of 4 years. So if a child started, this mechanism in the brain at the age of 8, he gave it 8, 9, 10, and 11. So, to kind of make it as inclusive to, what happens to children. And if there are delays, they are accounted for. And there could be so many reasons for an early or a late. So, it all falls within this range. and to kind of give people an idea that, okay, if it's within these few years, it's more or less normal and don't panic. Yeah. So we our first stage, which is the Tanner 1. Okay, so there are 5 stages of the Tanner scales. So you have Tanner 1, Tanner 2, Tanner 3, Tanner 4, Tanner 5. So in Tanner 1, we start off with the brain, right? And in this brain, you can see that there are 2 parts that are labeled here, which is the hypothalamus, right, and the pituitary gland. So these are basically, the hypothalamus is the headquarters of the center for hormones. Okay. And what are hormones? Hormones are these kind of chemical things that circulate all through our bodies. And something that you would have probably heard of quite commonly are estrogen, testosterone, adrenaline, so these are all the hormones. And this place here, the hypothalamus, right, which you can see is in this tiny space here, the really, really tiny portion here. So if you, yeah, so that is the hypothalamus. So that is the headquarters. So that's where, they receive all the main signals, the signals of origin come from the hypothalamus. So, and then you have the second executory ground over here called the pituitary gland, right? So the command center comes from here and the execution takes place from here, the pituitary gland. So this is what happens at the age of 8. At the age of 8, what happens is the hypothalamus wakes up and it says, okay, so it's come to this point in childhood where this child is going to have to start to change, right? And all this time, the body has physically developed in terms of up to a point, boys and girls develop in a relatively even plain fashion. And this is where the development begins to diverge. Yeah. So so what the hypothalamus does is it sends this thing called the gonadotropin hormone. Okay, gonadotropin releasing hormone. So basically what that means is, so the reproductory area, okay, the ovaries in females, women, they're called the gonads, right? So the gonadotropin releasing hormone means that we're going to have to send the material that is going to start activating the gonads, right? So that's what it does. And so the pituitary gland wakes up and says, okay, I'm going to uh, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to release 2 other hormones that are going to be responsible for waking the system up. And that is the luteinizing hormone, which is the LH, and FSH, which is the follicle stimulating hormone. So these 2 hormones, they get sent out to do the work. So that's what happens at the age of 8, around 8, 9, 10. So when this is happening, there's no changes seen to the body. There's no physical changes. It's just these hormones and these chemicals that are being released to do the work. And so what happens is, uh, so that takes place for a year, and then there's full preparations happening. So what the follicle stimulating hormone is, the FSH, what it does is that it begins to start waking up the ovaries. And within the ovaries, what's there? If you saw last time, if you saw last episode, uh, so you've got the ovaries here, right? And within the ovaries, you have the eggs. So like I mentioned last time, girls and women, basically, they are born with the eggs, right? So what the follicle stimulating hormone starts doing is, it starts saying, okay, guys, we're going to have to start getting released because this individual is going to start getting ready to become an adult. And for them to become an adult and a reproductive human being, and for them to start becoming sexually active, you're going to have to be released. So that's what the FSH does. So that's when the and what the luteinizing hormone does is it is in charge in the release and the production of estradiol or estrogen, which then becomes estrogen. So estrogen, estrogen, however you want to pronounce it. So estrogen is the core hormone for women. So it is the core hormone that allows for all the physical changes and the mechanisms that make women women. For all of those things to take place, estrogen is very integral to those processes. So that's what we see in stage two of the Tanner scales, is that estrogen starts circulating all through the body, and um, you have the reproductive system slowly starting to grow. And so you find that in stage two, which takes place around, at the age of 10, at the age of 10 and 11, you start seeing the breasts begin the process of emerging. So it's not like they become breasts immediately, they begin the process of emerging. And then you have, and so when breasts begin emerging, so from a flat chest, right? From a flat chest, you start seeing that there are certain very small projections that start forming on the torso of a girl. And uh, so these are called breast buds, right? They're called the buds, and they're just about slowly starting to give structure to the torso bit of a girl, right? And then internally, what starts happening is the uterus starts expanding and it starts becoming bigger, and you see that the labia. Okay, so is that picture? So yeah, so one of my favorite pictures. Yeah, so you see the labia. So these bits, okay, the lips, they start also becoming a lot fuller. Okay, so so if you see in girls it's quite flat. Okay, it's like a mannequin, right? If you see the mannequins, they're quite flat, and like their stomach just comes down and it just curves off. So whereas once these hormones start circulating through the body, you're going to have um, this the labia region start becoming fleshier. And to give a better idea of that, like I showed you last time, the realer picture of things. Yeah, so that becomes fleshier. I've actually got a picture here that show the Tanner stages. So I've got a few pictures actually. So this one picture shows the physical development of the Tanner stages, okay, where you can see, so now we just in stage one. So if you see in stage one here, it's very, you can see that there's no kind of change, right? And I don't like try and think back. Try and think back to what it was like for you and how you remembered your body, at this point of time. And if you've grown up with brothers and stuff, or sorry, if boys have grown up with sisters, and and at that point, at the age of 7 and 8, or at the age of 6 to 8, you're sharing rooms, you're sharing bathrooms. So if you've had that, if you have the recollection of maybe having a bath with your sister in the tub, and like your parents are giving you a bath or whatever it is, like there is that possibility of you remembering that image, that like, yeah, okay, this is my body and that's her body. Or even if it was between you and your sister, between two sisters, it's the recollection of this is my body and that's her body, and you begin to notice the differences. maybe a little later, and you start clocking them in. And I really want to encourage you to start going back and looking, and because I don't want this to be shameful. If you have been children who've grown up together and who've had baths together, understand that it's not bad to look back on that and to get informational value out of it. Because the thing is, when you've grown up that way, it was never done with that added intention of, that real awkwardness around it. You were just two kids growing up at that time. So try to decriminalize that sentiment in your mind, um, if your intentions are in the right place. Yeah. So, yes. So, if you see, so then you have like Tanner stage 1, then you move to Tanner stage 2, right? And if you can see here, slowly you start seeing that there's kind of a shaping that's given to this, right? Over here. Yeah. So you start seeing that, okay, it's slowly starting to emerge. Then what else do you notice? You notice that maybe like the area, the colored portion around the nipple also starts slowly increasing its circumference. Yeah. Got a couple more pictures of that to give you different angles of what that looks like. So that was a front profile of it. And what I'm going to show you now is a side profile of it. So here, these are another side profile of that. So if you look at, we're right now at stage 2. So stage 2, you start seeing that some kind of structure beginning to form, some kind of thing. And then down below, you start seeing that the labia starts getting fleshier, and and all these changes are just gradually taking place at the same time. Yeah. And the part that we can't see is the uterus. Then we're moving to Tanner stage 3. Okay, so Tanner stage 3 is the really probably most memorable time for all of us during the puberty stage, for both boys and girls. Because what happens in Tanner stage 3 is, all this while the chemicals have been doing their work, the hormones have been doing their work, they've been coursing through the body. The changes have just about started. But here in Tanner stage 3, that's where all the action begins to show. It's like real fireworks all over the place. And you can see, you can start seeing here that um, if you're a girl and you've experienced this, then what you start seeing is your boobs really, your breasts really start to begin to take shape here. And they're more or less. So if you look at Tanner stage 3, so where are we? Yeah, we're at stage 3. So they're really starting to protrude here. Yeah, they're really starting to protrude. And then what's happening down here? What's happening down here is that you start seeing that there's a forming of the pubic hair. Yeah, the forming of the pubic hair. But the thing is, the pubic hair starts forming first around the labia, the lips, right? And it's quite sparse. It's just about starting. And it's also around this time you start developing armpit hair. Yes. So that really, really fun time of all the hair sprouting, the hair's beginning to thicken. Um, the pubic hair starts becoming quite thick and curly. So just take yourself back to this time if you can, and just think about how this experience was for you. So you have your breasts really getting themselves out there. You have the changing of color, your nipple area and the areola. The areola is that shaded area around the nipple, the where it's a lot darker, or in some people it's quite pink, right? And so that you find in more Caucasian populations, that it's more pink. And then you find that among Hispanic people, Black people, and Asian, Yeah, and Asian people. So you start seeing, like, the real differences. So ethnicity also starts playing a role over here, and you start seeing the real differences over there, right? And then it's also at Tanner stage 3, you have the acne popping up, and uh, and then the growth spurt really kicks in for girls. So for girls, you find that if you've grown up with brothers, it was probably a really competitive time for you, because the girls are like just taking off. They're probably growing about 3.5 to 4 inches during this time, which is quite a bit. And yeah, so what's happening is that, like, whereas for boys, that growth spurt hits a little later. So that kind of competition is there. You find that in this time, which is probably around age 12 ish, you start finding that the girls are kind of probably matching or a little taller than the boys in their class, or the boys their age. And yeah, it can be quite a rough time for boys at this point of time, um, in terms of, from the social aspect of things. And you also find that the hips and the thighs of women are going to start widening. So, what they are starting from a straight kind of structure to a more curvaceous structure, giving allowances for the beginning of development for the birthing hips, right? To support a child, to support the mechanism of, a broader base, to kind of help with the pushing out of a baby, to, that entire region starts to expand, and there are the more muscles over there, and fat, and the accumulation of fat, all of those things happen around that region. So all of these things are beginning to happen and show themselves in stage 3. So stage 3 of the Tanner scales is also where you find the the menstrual cycles kicking in. So this is when, a lot of girls are getting their first period. They probably be at the age of 12. That's just an average. Many of them get it a lot earlier, and also many of them get it later. So, but this is just an average, just to keep in mind that this is what happens. So yeah, I think, like, Tanner stage 3 is quite a bit. Something I remember happening for me was that I used to, so I have a brother, and I used to play really rough with him, in the sense, like, we used to really punch and kick, and play Batman and Robin, and I was always Robin. Um, but yeah, we used to play quite rough. And what started happening at the age of 9, 10, when I guess I was going through the bud stage of forming breasts, is that there was so much of pain going on in my torso, but I didn't really understand it. um I didn't understand why suddenly there was so much of pain, and that's because there's like an expansion. The skin is expanding. There's more allowance for, fat formation here. The mammary glands to, really begin to develop. And I didn't understand, of course, at that age that anything was happening. So when he shoved me like that, and of course, it would just be in pure playfulness, that you encounter with, like, siblings. Um, but that would hurt me so much. And the thing is, I couldn't. And poor guy, he also didn't really understand, like, why suddenly, like, till now I was like, we were running around and we were playing wrestling and WWE, and all of a sudden, the minute I shove her, she's crying now. And so, it was a really confusing time for me as well. So yeah. Um then we go to Tanner stage 4. So Tanner stage 4 happens around the age of 13 and 14. And you start seeing that the development here you start seeing that they are probably, the breasts are slowly a lot fuller. So we're here. Yeah, we're here. So the breasts are probably a lot fuller, and you find that the areola region starts to darken a lot more. Then over here, you start finding that the hair growth is starting to form the more triangular on the mons pubis, the triangular area here. They're starting to begin to take shape of that triangular region. Yeah. And within Tanner stage 4, you find that in girls, the growth spurt the growth spurt starts slowing down, right? So you start seeing that instead of 4.8 inches, they go down to about 3 to 2 inches that happen per year. Yeah. So that starts happening there. And then here you start seeing, oh, this opposite camera always gets me. So yeah, here you start seeing that you start seeing that the hair over here starts getting really opaque. Yeah. And it's this would be a good time to introduce. So 12 and 13 is a good time to start introducing your children to the training bras, the really the bralettes, and uh, to get them acclimatized, because what's happening is this region could really use a lot of support. It's going through a lot of pain. So that kind of the with a well fitted bra, you're going to get a lot of support. You're going to have that area which is quite pulled at that moment. You're going to find it a little bit supported. Women and girls who are more developed around that region, who have bigger breasts, well, they really require that support, because it could be even more painful for them, because that kind of expansion, this expansion of the skin at that time, it's like the skin is suddenly getting really stretched out, and it's getting stretched to capacity, to this kind of the capacity that it's not really ready to hold. And for that to get acclimatized, for that kind of thing to happen, it's going to be really painful. So, a well fitted bra. And I'll tell you the reason for that a little later. Right. And then we move to the final stage, which is stand of 5, where, you've already had about probably a year or two of your menstrual cycles going on, and your breasts again take on your more or less adult, yeah, the more or less adult version of it. And you're probably, and this could be between the age of 15 to 18. So physically at Tanner 5, what it says is that the you've reached reproductive maturity. That means, when you say reproductive maturity, what that means is that physically you're probably ready to have a baby. Yeah. And you're ready to participate in sex and all of these things. But this very specifically is written that it's only physically. Emotionally, it's not indicative of that. Why? Because the brain is still developing. A large part of the brain, especially your cerebral cortex, so that's like the front, your cerebral cortex, that is the real thinking bits of the brain, your cerebellum, which is also in charge of a lot of decision making, coordination, and your frontal lobe, which is responsible for your thinking, your moral compass, your uh, your ability to weigh the right and the wrong. All of these faculties mentally are still developing. So you're still developing these abilities to think and regulate in terms of your cognition right up to the age of 21, which is why this is specifically puberty, specifically addresses um, emotional health, but not your cognitive abilities. Yeah. So, emotionally, what you're going through at this point of time is There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of depression, and not in the terms of a disorder, but in terms of the experience, because it's a very intense time. And then you also have the psychological aspect of things that during teenage, the world is all about this individual who's experiencing puberty, and the ability to see the world as an outside world is challenging, right? And the ability, so which is why you often hear from teenagers, you don't understand how I'm feeling, or you need to be me to really, it's so difficult. So all of these things, you find that it's really, you know mentally, this period in your life is so taxing, because uh, it's a period of transition, but you're no longer a child, because why, with each passing day you're resembling an adult. And then your brain, in terms of its cognitive development, in terms of maturation, hasn't really reached its full development, and there are a lot of changes going on, so there's a lot of wanting to experiment. And then also, what's happening is your social feedback that is happening from people around you. And this is where a lot of the changes start taking place. Um, and it determines how this period is going to be and how stormy it's going to be. It's going to be challenging for everybody, but the degree to how challenging it's going to be is very is determined by a lot of external factors. The external factors being the environment. And when I'm talking about the environment, I'm talking about the social feedback, the the place you're developing in, your socioeconomic income and the status, and all of these things, although we don't like to name them, they play a large role in influencing this transit in every aspect of our lives, but especially in the kind of experience that we're going through during this particular time of our lives, where there's already a lot of change, there's already a lot of unknown. Yeah. And women, it's found, tend to experience anxiety and depressive experiences a lot more. But they're still unsure of whether it is biologically, if we're more susceptible to such an experience, or whether it is also because of just the discrimination and just the kind of experience we have, considering that there's you start being noticed as a woman, and then when you're noticed as a woman, the entire gender discrimination also steps in. The expectation immediately rises, to act like a woman, to sit like a woman, to not be noticed a certain way, to keep yourself safe. Um, all of these things. Um, and then, of course, there's the aspect of sexual identity, which I mentioned last session. And there's a thing of whether you have a system that's going to educate you about that sexual identity, or completely divorce it from your menstrual identity. So depending on that, it kind of determines how integrated your identity is going to be in adulthood once you've crossed the threshold of puberty. So it's a really stormy time. Then, apart from just these internal changes, the physical changes, what's also happening is your skin, your cells become, your pores start expanding. There's more oil being released. So you start noticing that your skin, your pores have become extra oily. And because of the oil, your pores get clogged, and then you have acne. And so you have acne on your face, you could have acne on your chest, you could have acne on your back. And acne is also a very painful experience for both men and women and everybody in between. And the next thing again is your body odor. So, body odor is also at an all time high in terms of its intensity. You have, yourself smelling quite, the smells that you emit are really pungent, and they're quite strong and they're quite musky, and it's not pretty, is it? And especially for that expectation for a woman, the feminine attributes to be very floral and very pretty. These are rude awakenings to how the body functions. You have vaginal discharge, and oh yeah, by the way, vaginal discharge starts taking place at Tanner stage 3. And so there are all sorts of kind of emissions from you that begin to take place during this transition, whether it's your period blood, whether it's the tissue, whether it is the vaginal discharge, whether it's sweat, the growth of uh, pubic hair, the retention of smells. Why? Because if you're going to have thick hair in your armpits, if you're going to have thick pubic hair, what it actually helps in is that one is of course protective purposes, to make sure that evolutionarily there's no foreign particle that gets into any unwanted places. But also what happens is the hair, it retains sweat and it retains smells. And evolutionarily again, so that helps because it captures the pheromones, it alerts other the opposite sex about when you're most fertile. So all of those things are taking place through the smells that we emit. Um, and yeah, they are all musky, but they may not. But if it's really, really bad, then what it's indicative is, it's indicative of infection. So all of these things, if you notice, they're signals. They're very strong symbols. They're very strong signals, and each and every one of them have a purpose, right? Your vaginal discharge, although at times the idea of it seems quite ugh and icky, but what your vaginal discharge is constantly doing on an everyday basis is that it is cleaning out your vagina, right? So every day there's a mucus emission from your vagina that is ensuring that it's trapping all the bacteria, kind of giving it a good clean, and then just sending it on its way out. That, personally, when I think about it, I think that's like you've got like an automatic home maintenance system there, which is great. Then, even if you look at your period blood and what the function of the blood is actually an agent to carry out the tissue. So it's kind of, and it's kind of gelatinous if you actually notice the texture of it. Um, so it's got lesser hemoglobin, it's got lesser iron content, and in terms of, so the kind of blood that's leaving your body at this point of time is a blood that's very vehicular. It's like it acts like a vehicle. It takes out the dead tissue of the uterine wall, and it makes sure that it sends it on its way, and it kind of cleans out the uterus. So if you see all these emissions, each one of these emissions are serving a purpose. But in terms of how it affects us on our day-to-day lives, they're quite impactful in their ways. Yeah. Just seeing if there are any questions. No. Wait. Okay, so we've gone through these things. So now a few things that can influence a few things that can influence these things are, one is your genetics. So if you actually want to know more about the kind of patterns that you have, whether they are healthy patterns, whether you're, whether you're kind of susceptible to certain conditions, always check your family history. Check your family history. Ask your mom how it was. Ask your grandmom how it was, and ask your aunts, even your aunts, your maternal aunts, your paternal aunts, everybody within the first circle, right? Ask them all how their experiences were both on your mom's side and your dad's side, because what happens is it allows you to understand yourself better. Really does allow you to understand yourself better. Then the next thing is that determines it is your lifestyle. And when I say your lifestyle, it's talking about your physical activity, your intake of food, and just basically how regularly you have your meals, what is your diet like, is it vegetarian, or what are you used to, is it healthy, has it got the proteins, has it got the carbs, has it got a well balanced thing. All of these things are very very influential in the way your body develops and the kind of period you have. Then other things are your environmental factors. Now, what do I mean by your environmental factors? When I'm talking about your social environment, you start seeing differences in the way your puberty occurs. Now, it's seen that um, children who live in more urban areas, right? Children who live in metropolitan cities, in more busy places, right? In more busy places. So, what happens over there is you start seeing the kind of maturation taking place. What's happening there is the culture is faster in these places. So, what happens? The development is also pushed forward, right? Whereas if you start seeing the more urban places, right? The more rural places, where the pace of life is probably a lot slower, it's more chilled out. Then you start seeing even developmentally among the boys and the girls, you see that sexual maturation takes its time. So that is one thing. So those are things that are of environmental influences on the sexual maturation phase. Then all your so, another thing that influences it is your ethnicity. So your ethnicity really plays a role in terms of if you're a black person, if you're a Hispanic person, if you're an Asian person, if you're a white person. So these things really they play a role because why in Asians and white people you find that puberty kind of happens a little later. It's more actually you find that it matches the Tanner scales a lot more, whereas you find in Hispanics and in black people, so, what happens there is that you're likely to expect these changes to start taking place a lot earlier. So, you find that a lot of them would have got their period by the age of 9 and 10, whereas in Asian people, you find that 12 and 13 is more or less the kind of age that you reach, when you have your first period. So, the developments as well, you start seeing and how does this affect women? How does this affect girls? So what happens is that when you're when you're in a school and it's a multicultural school, right? Um, and there are people from different places coming in, each one of them having their own genetic history, ethnic history, and social setups. So what happens is you're seeing development also meet each other at different points of time. This can be really difficult for people who do not fall within that bell curve of, of how the sexual maturation takes place, how your period takes place, how puberty takes place, especially for people who start way earlier. Because if you're in changing rooms, if you're using toilets, if you're seen being more developed than the others, when it comes to your breasts and when it comes to your experience of cramps, it can be really difficult, especially considering that that girl is a child who's gone through this. And mentally, they may not be ready to have that conversation. And mentally, they feel different from the rest of the people in their class until so they're quite alone until people are ready to meet them because and their changes occur, and then suddenly, okay, there's conversation around that. Till then, it can be a really difficult time. And if parents are not willing to talk and acclimatize these children, and teachers and educators and everybody are trying to sidestep this conversation, what happens is this individual who's going through this tumultuous time can feel so isolated. And that in itself will give rise to the experience of anxiety and depression. That in itself is quite a traumatizing experience, which is why for many of us, puberty is a shut box they'd rather not look at. Even my mom was saying, I've closed that box, I've shut it, I don't want to go there, you know. Um, and for older women, if you actually see how their experience was, it was a lot more intense because especially if you my so I'm Indian, and in within the Indian context, at least from what my mom described, it was literally there was a no man's land and they had to exist within this no man's land um, for those days of their period, where they had to, and they used cloth pads in terms of, yeah, they used cloth pads, and they had to make sure that nobody saw them. They had to make sure they washed it outside, and and there was a general level of discomfort. Medication was not as far progressed in terms of, painkillers, and medicines were looking at painkillers as an option itself did not exist at the time. It was seen as you don't take medicine for these things. So yeah, so just thinking about their experience of it, it must have been so difficult for them. And then keeping all of this difficulty a secret and probably not knowing and feeling the pain. And my mom was telling me that at the time when she had her at the time when she was going through puberty and she was having, these changes happen to her breasts were growing and all of that, that was also the same time breast cancer awareness was taking place. And the message that was propagated was, you'll feel a lump, you'll feel pain where otherwise there's no pain. And I was just feeling for her, thinking, oh my gosh, just imagine the kind of, fear that she was going through, that she could possibly be having breast cancer as a child because of the pain in that region of development during the time of development. Yeah, so yeah, just there's so much to look at. Then another thing that occurred to me was that during this time, body image becomes of huge importance. And so a certain type of body type gets propagated as the normal. And this is what I want to stop right here and say, nope, that normal does not exist. Which is why I want to take some time to show you just exactly how many differences are there in your physical development as a woman, right? So now when it comes to the the female genitalia, I just want you to take in how many different kinds of female genitalia representations there are here. Okay, so there is no one way to show that either one is the right one, because that's just how it is. People are different, and so is the development of their bodies. Okay, and people don't see this, people don't talk about it. But I think it's really important that we see this, that, so this is as many as, and there are probably more, but this is a picture I could find. And then in terms of the kinds of breasts, because there's a kind of stereotype that, this is how breasts are, this is the desirable kind of breast, and that is can be a really harmful idea, because I just want to show you how many different kinds of body types are there, right? For you to have the different kinds of breasts, right? So your breasts are determined by, one is the kind of developments that's going to take place, how big your breasts are going to be, that's also genetic, and whether you're athletic, whether you're not, are you on, are you on the heavier side, are you on the thinner side? All of these aspects influence the structure of your body and how it's going to develop. And they are aspects that you do not have control over, and none of them are wrong, right? Which is why I wanted to show you this. If you actually see, is how many kinds of breasts are there, right? And if you see in most of them, you have like the pointy breasts, you have the rounded breasts, you have the really full breasts. I'm just showing you just how many body types are there, okay? And they're all determined by how broad your shoulders are, what your structure is like, all of these things, right? So just take a good look at these. Okay, and all of this development is happening, and it's all okay. Then in terms, again, another thing is the kind of nipple you have, and what is, it's not talked about, but that's like an artistic, I guess to an extent, an artistic representation of it. But yeah, just take some time and just see, try to identify where it is you sit, and what kind of breast you have, what kind of structure you have. Okay, and then of course here you have the body type, and there's so many different body types. Okay, so you have the different body types, and each one of them determine your, so some of them are determined by the ethnicity you have, you belong to, and your genetic bone structure, how your ancestors, or how your mom and grandmom, and like basically that whole line of development, it plays a massive role on how you develop as a person. So you've got these kinds of development taking place that's equally valid, and none of them are wrong. But if you noticed in all of them, so even if you see in the pictures that I showed you, whether it was of the Tanner stages, so this is a more real representation of the Tanner stages. So in all these representations, okay, if you see this picture, um, in all these representations, yeah, and even this picture, right? In all these representations, you find that there's one color that is being used to showcase, okay? It's one kind of body that's being showcased, it's one color, and that is a problem, right? That is a problem, because there are a lot of people who have different skin colors, who belong to different ethnicities, and they are waiting to see representation. They are waiting to see, um, they're waiting to see themselves in a picture to know that their body image is acceptable, their body image is normal. But if we're going to stick, and these are the images that are available in textbooks, these are the ones that I could find, and I was really, really looking for diverse representation as much as possible, and I couldn't find any, which I found was pretty problematic. So, if you can, I will upload this picture. Okay, I will upload this picture of body types. And if there are any artists out there, or you have friends who are artists, I just want to know if you can create this, look at your skin color and try to find a color pencil and your body type, and try to find a color pencil that can match your skin color or a combination of color pencils, and color this up and upload it on the Shameless page if you can, just so that we can increase the kind of data, we can increase the representation, and we can show people that if you can find yourself here, or if you can create a body type that you can't see here and that's your body type, please go ahead and do it. And if you can upload it on the Shameless page, that would be so great, because we'll be creating data. It will, and because it's on Facebook, it will be available on Google, and people who go looking for images on Google will be able to find these images. So I really hope you can be a part of this project. I will put it up again, and just, it's a cool coloring project. Outline it, have a little fun with it, um, try to find your own body type, and yeah, and just see where that goes. So yes, so that is that brings us to the end of today's session. So we've covered a lot, really, and I'll try to see if I can chunk them down to phases that are more digestible. But yeah, so today we covered puberty, we covered the Tanner stages, all the changes that take place in the in during the Tanner stages, um, and the kind of psychological implications, the role of hormones in the development, and how that determines your body image, and you know, uh, and how genetics and environmental factors also play a key role during this time of puberty. So please give me feedback about this session. I would really love some feedback, um, and your participation. I hope you can participate in this, uh, you know, in this little exercise, and probably maybe even something to do with this exercise. Um, yeah, they all like pretty waxed vaginas. So I'm sorry, vulvas. Yeah, they're all pretty waxed vulvas. So all these vulvas grow with hair. Just saying. Okay. So yeah, so that brings us to the end of our second episode of Shameless. Thank you so much. And if you want a second segment about puberty, let me know, because I feel like could have been a little less rushed. And yeah, so and feedback would really help me out. And yes, so which brings me to the last point is my next session is on the 5th of September, again at 3:30 UK time and 8 p.m. Indian time. And the topic is period management. So the period management I'm going to be talking about is all the paraphernalia we use, the things like um, pads, tampons, menstrual cups, and the whole works, the kind of food to be eaten that could help, and and yeah, and just generally pain management, other than painkillers and stuff, and just that entire segment of how those things work. So period management is on 5th September, and I hope you join me for that. It'll be really good to have boys and men be a part of that conversation. Why? So that you can help the women in uh, your household, in your surroundings, among your friends, your girlfriends, your wives, your daughters, whoever it is, because I'll be explaining like how to choose a pad, how to understand flow, all of those things, how to choose tampons, menstrual cups, all that stuff. And it will be so much easier for you to help them out in that way. Yeah. So, hoping to see you next week. And thank you so much for listening. And I'll see you next Saturday, 5th September. Bye bye.